Welcome back. At the very end of the last episode, I made an offhand remark about needing to quarry some stone for my building projects and left it there. But, in retrospect, I really ought to have made a bigger deal out of it because efficiently quarrying stone ended up being quite an interesting problem. Also, I need more copper, so while I do that, you get to listen to me blather on. To reiterate the situation I find myself in, Toto, we aren't in Minecraft anymore. Smooth stone blocks are uncraftable in Vintage Story, and the only way to get them is to remove the blocks touching all 6 faces of a stone block and then pick the stone block up as an item when it collapses. Mining stone takes time, consumes pickaxe durability, and means that I'm not quarrying smooth stone, so I need to determine the most efficient mining pattern that will maximize the number of 1x1 stone blocks getting left behind to collapse. So class, settle in. Today we are learning about geometric proofs. There is a provably optimal way of doing this, and I'm going to explain it. So if you want a chance to try and figure it out yourself, I would pause the video here. Moving on. There are a couple of immediately apparent observations we can make about the problem. The first is that in a perfect world where you don't have to worry about seeing the blocks you mined, the most efficient possible mining pattern would be a kind of 3D checkerboard design with a ratio of 1:1, blocks quarried versus blocks mined. I will skip all the math, but the intuition here is that it has to be the most efficient pattern, because every face on a block you mine in it touches a face of a block you keep. If there were a more efficient pattern, that would imply that the number of block faces is greater than the number of destroyed ones, meaning you somehow have destroyed blocks that have more than 6 sides, which is impossible. We also know that there is no other equally efficient tessellation pattern, because in order for the pattern to be different, you would have to move a block, and you can't do that without 2 kept blocks touching faces and thus lowering the quarried stone ratio below 50%. Cool, so we've established a theoretical maximum. The second obvious observation is that you can't just telekinetically mine blocks that are surrounded on all 6 sides by other blocks. You have to be able to see them to mine them. This, obviously, will force the efficiency down even further. Now, the best possible layout must be one where each theoretically keepable block you sacrifice is touching 5 blocks you needed to mine anyway, and all the other blocks that were touching those blocks are the ones you can keep. If you count the faces involved in that arrangement, you end up exposing 48 faces for every 60 you destroy, which drops the maximum theoretical efficiency to 4/9, or 44.4%, repeating. That's the upper limit, of course. Currently, we have no way of proving a pattern exists that can do that, so let's experiment. An obvious naive solution would be to carve out 1x1 pillars in the rock in a checkerboard pattern, and then lop them off in 1 block high slices. This produces a repeating 2x2 tileable pattern that looks like this, and would let you keep 2 blocks at the cost of mining 6. It's not the worst pattern in the world, but it's leaving almost half of our potential on the table, so it's still pretty bad. A better idea would be to cut vertical slices in the rock with 2 blocks of stone between them, and then carve out those rock bookshelves in a checkerboard pattern that we discussed earlier. There are actually 2 tessellating shapes in this design, but when you pattern them out to infinity, they both end up giving you 2 blocks at the cost of 4, or 33%, which is a pretty big improvement. I played around with other designs for a while, but most of them either weren't tileable, sucked more, or were just kind of a pain in the butt, until I found a perfectly optimal one. It's a bit ugly, but it's also, unfortunately, the only perfectly optimal one, so blame the laws of geometry, I guess. The base tile shape is a kind of plus-shape design that stacks on top of themselves to form a pillar. You then do a tessellation with those pillars, but offset them, so each pillar borders 4 pillars that are either raised or lowered by a block to line up their air gaps. The end result, and probably the easiest way to remember it, is the ideal 3D checkerboard pattern, but with holes drilled into it in the same pattern you would use for an optimal sugarcane farm in Minecraft, so you can access the rest of the stone you need to mine. Is this confusing? Yes, but it does work. Needless to say, my stone reserves are abundantly healthy after all of the work that went into figuring out that bit of tech, so I am free to continue constructing largely unrestrained by a lack of resources. Unfortunately, I am restrained somewhat by my lack of aesthetic sensibility, so the end result is a lot of things being, well, goosey. I won't say functionalist design is bad, necessarily, but it is readily apparent that I'm unaccustomed to doing things just because they look good. That's fine, though. I can always make a pretty house the second time around once all the progression is done. The temporal storm that rolls in while I'm trying to do something creative with my archways also didn't help matters, though I do at least get another one of those fancy blue gears from some twitchy spider thing that spawned in next to me and tried to crunch my beans. And now that I think about it, I should probably experiment with them at some point to see how that respawn mechanic works. This is also where I discovered that, oh yeah, my armor is entirely broken. This doesn't destroy the armor set per se, it just means that it grants no defensive buffs until I fix it, which given its current state would be quite expensive, so we're probably not gonna do that. Still, armor is great for sustaining the body, but good architecture is what ennobles the soul, so rather than do, productive things to preserve my future life insurance premiums, I make sure to finish up laying out all the floors on the ground floor, or I guess the ground plus a bit floor. If I might toot my own horn a bit here, the place looks like it's gonna come out pretty darn cool looking as well. I added some archways that had the dual benefit of sectioning off space in a structurally realistic way and getting some much needed curvature and delineation in an otherwise far too open area, and I have enough headspace that I can do ceiling texturing without smacking my head into everything every time I dare to look up in it. Of course, the trade-off is that I am now once again out of building materials, so more stone mining definitely gonna be a thing in my future. Of course, I can't spend the whole episode breaking rocks and then replacing them in slightly different configurations though, so let's actually do some fun things. I need pelts for armor upgrades, and just in general, meat for food stockpiles, and fat for curing leather, preserving food, and making light sources, so hunting is obviously a good thing to be doing right now. To that end, I make myself another set of fun new toys, a bow and a bunch of arrows. Now, I feel like it should be blindingly obvious what these are for, but in case you have somehow been living under one of the very few rocks I haven't stolen from the local environment, bows shoot arrows, and arrows kill animals if you hit them with enough of them. Sadly for me, however, vintage story arrows kind of suck and lack all of the benefits afforded to actual real-life hunting arrows, which are usually designed to inflict blood loss rather than acute blunt trauma. The end result, then, is less hunting and more me chasing a stupid deer all over heaven's creation for half a day straight until it falls over from severe brain damage caused by me plinking it in the head with pointy rocks. Sure, it might be a more compact ranged weapon, but I might just have to stick with spears, thanks. So this is fine for pelts, but for meat it leaves something to be desired, and that something is speed, so let's try a new plan. I have a bunch of mostly useless berry mash left over from juicing, and a bunch of reed baskets that I won't ever be using again now that I can make trunks. If we combine these two excesses with some sticks, we can make animal traps. I have no idea how reliable or effective these things will be at scale, or for that matter, if they work passively or require actual animals to spawn in and wander into them and get caught, but it's not like they cost me anything, so it can't really hurt. Meanwhile, it's back to big game hunting for me. I was hoping to bait in some wolves to attack me or something, but all I managed to find so far is deer, which sure are worth a lot of meat, but are also kind of annoying to hunt because I can't run them down and beat them with sticks, which until this point has been my prevailing strategy. At this point, I have also decided that at its current power level, the bow is not for me, at least not for hunting in this context. One arrow isn't even enough to kill a chicken, and that is a sad level of damage output given that I can quite literally run down a chicken and smack it over the head faster than I can bring one down with arrows now. Of course, the bow does have one thing going for it, which is that every once in a while I get lucky and tick off a deer enough that it wants to fight me, which works, I guess. I have nothing against going stag clubbing, though usually I will say that there's a bit more music involved. My first big hunting break comes when I run across just an absolutely absurd amount of pigs. Like, forget asking who let the dogs out, my question is, who invited a Muppet cosplay convention into the middle of an empty field, and how big did they promise the ball pit would be? It was absurd. Pigs are one of the ideal animals for me to hunt as well. They're big, meaty, slow, and most importantly, for my ease of farming and just general life quality, they're unbelievably stupid creatures with no sense of survival instinct whatsoever. Seriously, these things are the dumbest animals to ever walk the surface of this planet. Half of my pig kills came about because they walked up to me and tried to grab a bite out of the corpse of another pig that they saw me kill right as I was in the middle of harvesting it. These things are like dodos, if dodos had a habit of taking a nap in actively cooking soup pots. Needless to say, after unironically 13 confirmed pig kills that day, my kitchens were very busy the following night, as was my clay forming station, also known as the basement floor. I do actually have a bunch of crocs already smelted, but if I have another couple of days like that one, I'm going to run out again. For those of you keeping track, each pig gives, on average, 4 meals worth of meat, meaning I am quite literally potting entire pigs here. So yeah, storage is kind of important, y'all. To help with this, I shell out for yet another bronze-colored quality of life upgrade called a scythe. In addition to reaping the heads of my enemies, it also doubles as a really excellent lawnmower for those of us who have a sudden and inexplicable urge to branch out into self-supplied pottery barn franchising, or I guess if your enemies are grass stalks. That's great and all, but mostly I think the swoop-swoop noises are fun sounding, though again, that might be a psychosomatic effect caused by me associating it with severing the heads of my enemies. It's hard to say. Either way, it does an excellent job collecting grass, which I need to smelt all of my crockery. So with all those cooking, I hope to get lucky again and head back to the pig pen in search of bountiful bacon, and this time around find 1 chicken and a bunch of wolves. Now, sure, there are a lot of wolves, but wolves aren't very good for eating, so I was less than thrilled by this, and I was even more less thrilled when one of them decided to run off a cliff. Apparently, pit trap farming was a thing that had to be nerfed in the past, because killing animals with fall damage now means that you get less stuff off of them, which makes precisely 0 sense, but sure, I guess. By now, at least, I do have the stuff for some upgrades. First are some pork chop pelts that I have been making soak in their own rendered juices for several days now, which are a necessary ingredient for crafting myself a intact set of armor. Running around in the buff, while freeing, is probably not the best idea when I'm going to be spending every minute of my day trying to solo Mother Nature in her home country, so this seems like an excellent investment. My other inventory upgrade is brought to you by the Agricultural Revolution. Linen bags are a thing I can make now, and while it does cost a substantial amount of flax fiber to make 4 of them, I consider the upgrade well worth it for the 4 additional inventory slots that they grant me. This routine continues for another couple of days. When dawn breaks, I'm out in the wilderness doing my level best to extinctify every edible animal larger than a butterfly, and by night I'm cooking and potting up all of the tasty goodies I extracted during the day before squirreling it away in my pantry like the world's most unsanitary collection of nuts. During this several-day-long animal extermination bender, I'm also pleased to report I successfully bagged my first bear. Barely, pun intended. In fact, this is my second attempt at bagging this bear, seeing as the first one went less than stellar. But point remains, I'm alive, and the bear is not. Mind you, I have not the foggiest idea what I'm going to do with a bear skin. It's not exactly a cat, so its rug-making qualities are perhaps a tad questionable. Sometime around the 4th or 5th day of this, even I, the dictionary definition poster child of food insecurity, am forced to admit that I'm probably gonna be fine, nutrition-wise. I have barrels of alcohol stacked up in my basement too high, entire jars full of vegetables and grains to chew through, and even if those are somehow not enough, multiple jars full of nothing but crocks of high-quality pre-made meals. For all that I may pretend otherwise, the risk of me starving is probably pretty low. This means, of course, that I now need to find something else to do with my time, and I think I have just the candidate. Skinning and butchering the average population of an African game reserve in the span of a week did excellent things for my larder, but it also made a not insubstantial contribution to the animal skin collection I've been building up in my basement for some time now, and we are getting to the point where I really need to use those skins or let them rot, which seems kind of a waste. To prevent this, we need to process them, and to process them, we need borax, so off to the borax mines I go. I have found precisely 1 surface deposit of the stuff a while back, so I can grab that for now to tide me over, but I'm going to need to find a proper deposit at some near point in the future. With this freshly mined surface borax, I can then create borax powder using a new crafting machine called a quern, which is basically just a giant pile of stones that you kind of use as a mortar and pestle and grind things up. That borax dust can then be mixed in a barrel with a bunch of water to create dilute borax solution, which in theory I can stick my raw hides into to soak. Certain execution failures may have been involved here, but I do eventually figure out how this works. Once I filled every available unoccupied barrel with animal skins and rock juice, I then turn to other practical projects, such as grinding down all of the piles of unstacking random animal antlers I keep looting off of deer. Is this necessary? No, not in the least. Does it make me feel better to get rid of all of these single non-stacking largely useless items from my chests? Yeah, amazingly it does. And speaking of absolutely unnecessary, all of those hides are going to take a bit to do their soaking thing, and lacking any pressing need to depopulate the wildlife for like the 7th day running, I find myself with a bunch of free time and no really good ideas for what to spend it on. For me, the state idle time immediately autocompletes to collect more shinies, both in real life and in video games, so I opted to try and spend this time mining out a quartz vein I discovered earlier on to maybe potentially find deposits of rare metal like gold or silver. This project was entirely unsuccessful, though I'm unsure of whether it was because I just happened to get unlucky or that native metal deposits just straight up don't spawn in surface quartz. So as a consolation prize, I do even more mining to extract another deposit of borax that I stumbled over while trying to get rich quick. Still, even if I didn't get any buttery nuggets of goodness from my excavation extravaganza, I did succeed in my primary goal, which was to waste a bunch of time, and when I get back home, my batch of dead animal leather has finished soaking in its juices. Seeing this is the step that takes the perishable hides and turns them into unperishable leather hides, this is one of the things I was most worried about getting done quickly, and now that it's done, I can kind of chill and do whatever I feel like, which is a good thing, because the next step of the process requires rather more barrels full of tree juice this time than I'm able to supply right now, so I just top everything off with the rest of my slightly moldy wolf pelts and move on to other things. In this case, other things is more stone quarrying. Between leatherworking and the bulk production of large quantities of adult beverages, I have kind of seen the writing on the wall when it comes to the necessity of more storage and production space, and, well, yes, having the barrels in the basement makes thematic sense and looks cool. I really don't have the space for the number I'm going to end up needing here, and I am still horrendously lacking in the building materials needed to fix that problem. All of this freshly cracked cobble is then immediately repurposed into plugging the holes in the ground floor of my lovely little farming establishment and scaffolding out the stairwell walls and windows of the second, which, if I may say so myself, actually looks downright not wholly terrible, despite being ostensibly made out of mine tailings and very small pieces of dirt with delusions of self-importance. Sure, I can't see a darn thing when night falls, and yes, I imagine building the place out of rock won't earn me any brownie points with the environmentalists when I have to heat it in the winter, but it definitely beats the snot out of the sod sadness shack that I was starting out in. Now suitably supplied with a conveniently located barrel repository that comes with a definitely 100% finished roof with no obvious holes whatsoever, I can get tannin production going. It isn't really anything special, you just lob some water and a bunch of oak in a barrel, seal it up, and the barrel magically dissolves the 5 cubic meters of log you put in there into the water somehow before doing the world's worst Jesus impression and turning the whole mess into gas station jungle juice. Speaking of oak, I need to stock up on that again, which is a task that lines up nicely with my need to top up the critically depleted stick reserves, courtesy of my strange obsession with crafting way too many barrels for no real reason other than aesthetics. You would think that, having perfected the process of smelting metal alloys into advanced woodworking tools, my dude could figure out that if you chop a big piece of wood into little pieces of wood, you get sticks, but apparently that is too advanced of a concept, so instead I get to exfoliate oak trees with the world's most aggressive pair of tweezers before chopping it into conveniently barrel-sized pieces. I still end up needing to give my barrels of poo juice some more time to soak, so rather than sit around and beat up rocks to get more home construction going, I decide to wander around the countryside and beat up rocks to get some better tools going, because variety is the spice of life. The goal of this little prospecting adventure is to locate candidate spots for a vein of iron-bearing ore, which I need to make, you guessed it, iron! Wow, it's amazing how those naming conventions work. Unlike cassiterite or copper, though, I've had pretty much zero luck with this so far, and only ever found one ping with more than a trace amount, which means I get to run around like a lunatic, prospecting the insides of all the wildlife that decide they want to add poultry to their diet whilst hammering on every conveniently available rock face. It turns out that my initial random ping was actually pretty spot on for the richest concentration of the stuff in the area, if you want to call 49 mil a rich concentration. So there's nothing for it but to start dropping shafts and see what I can find. Spoilers, it's not much. What I find is ilmenite, a rare titanium-bearing ore that's so high tier I can't even mine it until I get steel tools. Didn't get any iron, mind you, just the stuff that's utterly useless until I start doing endgame iron forging tech. Yeah, that kind of fits. So anyway, I climbed back up to the granite line, which is where the only kind of iron ore that spawns in this area would be if there was any, and started strip prospecting there, but was very quickly chased out by the demonic trumpet noises, reminding me that I can only spend a few minutes underground at a time before the crazy kicks in, and there aren't any high stability areas around to recharge, so prospecting is going to be something of a slow process. While waiting for the sanity wheel to crank back over, I decided to pay a visit to the conveniently placed petting zoo nearby. Both of the dogs there tried to bite me, the lighting of the fish tank was terrible, and also, who wants to pet fish anyway? And the one pig they had ran away from me and then fell asleep once I really started getting at it. 2 of 10, would not recommend. The next underground adventure, somewhat vexingly, finds basically everything except iron. Ilmenite for days, some more exposed tin that I will absolutely be coming back for because I'm running low, mountains of copper, this really cool underground waterfall thing that leads to nowhere. None of it, barring the tin, is relevant in any way, shape, or form to any of my tech progression, of course, so, useless. No matter, or maybe sparse, but my will is indefatigable. Unfortunately, my pickaxe durability, sanity meter, stomach contents, and level of free time didn't get that hint, so I decided to do the smart thing and find a better concentration of iron somewhere else. Welcome to winter, by the way. Sure, it might be the middle of October, and therefore not winter at all, but there's snow on the ground, so as far as I'm concerned, it's winter. Given the average level of precipitation in the area, I foresee phenomenal amounts of snow in my near future. Oh, also, yeah, it's cold. Right, forgot to mention that. Now, I like running around in ankle-deep snow in my skivvies as much as the next person, which is to say somewhere between Taco Surprise Sunday and a live porcupine enema, but freezing to death is slightly inconvenient to my overall goal of apparently discovering rich deposits of every kind of ore except iron. It's wild, y'all. My map is solid green for things that I don't need. But anyway, let's maybe work on the whole not turning into a goose sickle thing, shall we? Yeah. For now, that mostly involves crafting myself some nice fuzzy boots with the fur, and some gloves, and patching up the holes in the fishnet stockings masquerading as commoner attire that I spawned in with. I do have more hides curing for better furry coats and stuff, but they take a little bit, and I kinda thought I had a few more days before the winter storms really started hitting. It should do for now. Further exploration is halted by an inclement temporal storm, which by this point doesn't represent all that much of a threat to me life termination-wise, but it does make travel, shall we say, problematically hostile, so I opt to ride it out back home from the relative safety of my mostly demon-free roof. And I gotta say, the aesthetics do not disappoint. Vintage Story has kind of a decaying Gears of the World vibe going on with it from what I've seen, and I dig it so much that I just kind of wandered around for a bit, looking at the scenery. After the storm, and another horrendous amount of aimlessly wandering around smacking things with a pickaxe, I finally located a decent quality magnetite vein a good kilometer north of my house that at the very least should get me something worth smelting. You can tell there's ore nearby, because of the equally horrendous amount of wolves in the area, by the way. It's kind of a clue. Naturally, my food supplies were critically low when I found this, however, so I'm going to have to go all the way back home, pick up some Lunchables, and come all the way back up here before I can dig anything. So I do that, and start popping a mine shaft down, and almost immediately find an enormous deposit of magnetite. That's more like it. It's also so near the surface, and the ambient area is so stable already that I don't even have to worry about danger noodles infesting my brain either, so I think you can figure out what's going to happen next. Several pickaxes worth of dirty magnet juice later, and I am now many stacks richer of iron, possibly ore, and several pickaxes poorer, a trade that I view as eminently worthwhile. Now I just have to make iron out of it, which is easier said than done. Iron, like copper and tin, suffers the unfortunate drawback of having a thing called a melting point, and it's higher than anything I've smelted thus far. So high, in fact, that you can't cast with it at all. Instead, I need a structure called a bloomery, which melts down the ore of whatever variety into chunks of rich iron, called blooms, that I can then beat the snot out of on an anvil to make wrought iron. These bloomeries are pretty cheap to make, all things considered, but they do require powder flint, which is, shall we say, time-consuming to make. Still, it gives me a chance to get all my pelts moved over for another soak in extra dense gas station jungle juice, and after that they will turn into lovely supple leather, so silver linings. One extremely large bonfire later, and an enormous amount of hot chunks of flint can then be ground down into calcified flint dust, which, when mixed with clay, turns it into fire clay. You can actually make pottery with this stuff, though heavens know why you would want to, given how annoying bulk flint collection is, but much like everything else worth doing, I need to shape it into things and blast it with lots and lots and lots of hot things in order to use it, so into the pottery holes it goes. Incidentally, I have a lot of crocks now. Probably too many, to be honest, because I can't store this many of them unless I stack them on the floor, but that is a good problem for me to have. Now we get to the other part of the whole iron forging project. The fuel. My, shall we say, somewhat over-spec'd charcoal pit a few episodes ago has kept me stocked up with smelting fuel quite well until now, but from what I can tell, iron processing is going to require a lot, and steel, when I get to that point, is going to need even more. This is no bueno, and the time has come to stock back up again. And that starts with a healthy bit of mass dendrological extinction. This time around, I have shears, at least, so I can grab a bunch of sticks for various things, and tree seeds to replant all of the dendrological extinction that I have extinctified, though in my experience, growing trees takes rather a lot more time than is useful. That's actually a project I want to work on later, is figuring out how exactly forestry works in this game, because from what I can tell, the answer is mostly just it doesn't, and the saplings seem to have a terrible case of anal glaucoma and only really get around to doing anything after 6 months, so... Still, if you ignore the incessant monkey infestation issues, wood collection goes as well as can be expected. I somehow figure out how to chop it into firewood, despite the arcane technology known as stick crafting still being beyond me, light it on fire, bury it in dirt, and move on with my life to let my potatoes in potentia cook in peace. In the meantime, let's get the iron frying. My exotic clay-throwing extravaganza has by now netted me 36 fire bricks, which I can craft into exactly 3 bloomery plus bloomery chimney combinations in a perfectly measured out and 100% intentional fashion. I definitely did not just crank out what seemed like a good amount of bricks and forget to make sure that I had enough beforehand, because that would be stupid. Regardless of providence, I get the bloomeries up, stack a buttload of freshly hammered iron ore blebs into them, provide 6 potatoes each for healthy eating, and light them on fire. Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. Speaking of 4 to 6 weeks, my leather is done, finally, and oh goodness gracious, do I have a lot of it. Kind of way too much of it, if I'm being honest. So this is another one of those situations where I kind of didn't bother to do the math before I decided to hammer a problem with the sledge of extremely large amounts of stuff, and now that I look at it, there really isn't any reason for me to have made this much leather. The big thing that I get out of it right now is leather backpacks, which grant 6 inventory slots each, and ignoring the custom bags dedicated to specific stuff like mining, as far as I can tell, these are the largest bags in the game. More storage, more gooder, blah blah blah, that's fantastic. That used 32 leather out of 114. So now I need to figure out what to spend the rest on, and from the looks of it, the answer is not much. Better armor is more better, sure, but my bronze lamel is fine for everything short of bear attacks, and I can run from those, and better armor makes me slower and eat more, so it's actually not that much better at all. Deer trophy mounts might be a fun aesthetic thing if I had any deer trophies worth mounting. Shields require me to craft and then subsequently use a shield, and clothing is only good if you can wear it without freezing to death, so it's not good right now. The best option I could find for leather use is selling it, which I guess is worth it, maybe? Anyway, the leather excess is a problem for another day. It's time to get me some iron. My bloomers have had some time to think things through and produced a hearty collection of iron blobs that I can harvest for further refinement. Unfortunately, the bloomeries did not survive this harvesting process, and the brick return rate is somewhere around 70%, so large-scale flint collection is probably going to be something that needs to happen in the immediate future, but that also is a problem for another day. For now, let's beat the snot out of some iron. This process, called working, is a bit of a delicate one, and is also really aptly named. I have to heat up iron bloom in a forge and hit it repeatedly in a vaguely organized fashion to knock off all the slag left over from the blooming without also accidentally knocking off usable iron voxels, and once the bleb is cleaned up enough, I can then start forging it into an ingot shape. After I trim all the slag and excess iron off and finish it, I'm left with a hot smithable ingot of wrought iron that I can turn into whatever I want. The resulting tool I make out of my first ingot of iron, which is a pickaxe because of course it is, has over double the durability of my tin bronze ones, mine's at a higher tier, and is substantially faster in doing just about everything. And it also takes flipping ages to make, so future ironworking is something that will have to take place later. For now, thank you for your time, If you're interested in buying Goose-themed mousepads, information on how to go about doing that is in the description, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.